Did you know the original Legend of Zelda didn't start as an open-world adventure? Most people think Miyamoto designed the overworld first, then added the dungeons later, but the truth is the complete opposite. Zelda began as a game made entirely of dungeons. No fields, no towns, no exploration, just maze after maze after maze. In Shigeru Miyamoto's own words, at the beginning of development, it was just dungeons. There was no overworld map. That quote comes straight from Iwata Asks, and where the team explained how they originally built the game as a massive grid of tile-based mazes, each room a little square they could rearrange, like puzzle pieces to fit the Famicom Disk System's tiny memory. Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, the same duo behind Super Mario Bros., spearheaded the game, but while Mario was about smooth, side-scrolling motion, Zelda was the complete opposite, slow, methodical, and exploratory. Miyamoto handled the concept, that sense of adventure and discovery, while Tezuka worked on the structure and balance that would make those dungeon layouts actually playable. In the initial days of the legend, it was nothing but a dungeon crawler, just room after room of puzzle boxes and monsters. When I first learned that, it kind of blew my mind, because it means the open world freedom we associate with Zelda today wasn't the foundation, it was the upgrade. The original idea was all about claustrophobic mazes, spatial logic, and the thrill of surviving one room at a time. Sounds eerily similar to another Nintendo franchise that I know of, that of course being Metroid. Coincidentally, they both share a similar release year as well. It's wild to think that what started as a bunch of boxes on graph paper became one of gaming's most open, exploratory worlds, because the overworld came later. The overworld. Our lovely Hyrule, a kingdom filled with so many childhood memories. We all remember getting lost in there, but it all came later when Miyamoto wanted to make players feel like they were exploring a real place. The concept of open world gaming truly found its mainstream breakthrough with The Legend of Zelda for the NES. Before Zelda, early open world experiments like Adventure and Elite had introduced the idea of non-linear exploration and player freedom, but they were often limited by technology and niche audiences. Zelda was the first to translate that freedom into an emotionally engaging, accessible adventure, blending technical innovation with storytelling and atmosphere in a way that captivated millions. The game's overworld, the Kingdom of Hyrule, was designed to make players feel like they were stepping into a living, breathing space. Shigeru Miyamoto, the game's creator, drew direct inspiration from his childhood experiences of exploring caves, forests, and rural landscapes near his home in Kyoto. He described the thrill of getting lost and the joy of finally finding his way out, emotions he wanted to recreate through gameplay. That personal vision became the heart of Zelda's open world, a place of mystery, discovery, and quiet wonder. Unlike most games of its era, which relied on linear levels or mission structures, The Legend of Zelda dropped players into the world with no clear direction. There were no tutorials, markers, or dialogue prompts, just a vast land full of secrets. Players had to learn by doing, experimenting with where to go, what to fight, and which items to use. It was both liberating and bewildering. Many players wandered aimlessly through forests or deserts, stumbling upon dungeons or hidden caves entirely by accident. The developers knew players might feel lost, and they wanted that. They intentionally designed Hyrule to encourage curiosity and make exploration itself the reward. The team anticipated that players could feel lost, so they leaned on the manual and other out-of-game guidance. Who knew getting lost would be this fun, right? Players had no clue what to do or where to go, and the dev team realized they'd gone too far into chaos. That's when they decided to balance the freedom of the overworld with the structure of the dungeons. That back and forth became Zelda's heartbeat. Freedom versus focus. You wander, then you solve. You explore, then you conquer. Even now, that rhythm defines the entire franchise, and it all started because people got too lost in the prototype. Well, haven't we all been there? Because I bet this wall definitely has something behind this. If there was a happy accident in Zelda's development, it wasn't adding dungeons late. It was realizing that two totally different playstyles could coexist and make each other stronger. You've got the open overworld discovery, freedom, exploration, and the structured dungeons puzzle, tension, focus. Put them together and you get that perfect gameplay loop. Get lost, then stumble across something meaningful. I love that duality. You can feel it even in modern Zelda when you finally solve a shrine puzzle in Breath of the Wild after wandering the wilderness. It's the same emotional hit as clearing a dungeon after exploring Hyrule in 1986. This tug of war between structure and freedom has been haunting Zelda devs for nearly 40 years. In A Link Between Worlds, they tried letting players rent items so you could tackle dungeons in any order. It was their first major experiment in breaking the lock and key structure. Then, Breath of the Wild went all in on open design physics systems, exploration, and pure chaos. Players could climb anywhere, break anything, and sometimes literally break the game. The devs said early prototypes were so unstable that the world fell apart if you played too freely. And then Tears of the Kingdom circled back again, reintroducing handcrafted structure while keeping that same sense of adventure. You can almost feel Nintendo trying to keep the two halves of Zelda's soul from drifting too far apart. So yeah, The Legend of Zelda didn't become great because they added dungeons or overworld. It became great because they combined two different kinds of play: freedom and control. The early game's tile-based dungeon grid gave players structure. The new overworld gave them wonder. And somehow, those two ingredients, pure logic and pure curiosity, fused into one of the most iconic designs in gaming. Zelda started as a game about getting lost, and ended up teaching me and many generations what it means to find your own path. The first game was launched on the Famicom Disk System in the year 1986 in Japan. Nintendo even gave it a subtitle, The Hyrule Fantasy. When the game finally crossed the ocean a year later, August 22, 1987 in the US, and November 27, 1987 in Europe, it came on that iconic gold NES cartridge that made the game look simply legendary. This wasn't a marketing afterthought either. The idea came straight from the development and promotion team at Nintendo of America. They wanted players to feel like they were buying something mythic, not just another game. The result? A shimmering gold cartridge that stood out in every store shelf full of gray NES carts. I still remember seeing it for the first time. It looked like treasure straight out of a dungeon. When you held that card up to the light, you didn't just see a game, you saw the legend. Even today, collectors treat those gold carts like holy artifacts. Later Zelda releases, from A Link to the Past to Ocarina of Time, occasionally revived the gold cart design as a nod to that 1987 classic. There are so many features in modern Zelda games, and games in general we take for granted, like the save feature. I can't imagine playing a game right now with no saves. Like, how can one play the entirety of Breath of the Wild, having to go through that intro every single time, and completing all of it in one go? I mean, technically you can, if you just head straight for the final boss after descending from the Great Plateau, but where's the fun in that, right? Nintendo's developers, led by Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, realized that The Legend of Zelda's ambitious vision, a sprawling world with multiple dungeons, hidden items, and non-linear progression, couldn't fit within that old model. Players needed a way to return to the same world they had shaped, maintaining their inventory, completed dungeons, and explored areas. Before The Legend of Zelda's release in 1986 in Japan and 1987 internationally, most console games were designed to be played from start to finish in a single sitting. Once you turned off the console, your progress vanished. Arcade culture had heavily influenced early design philosophy. Short, high-score-based gameplay was the norm. Even adventure games on home consoles relied on password systems that let players manually record long strings of characters to resume from a certain point. When Zelda launched in Japan on the Famicom Disk System, saving your progress was handled directly on the rewritable disc. No passwords, no codes, no notepad full of random letters. You just picked one of 3 save files on the title screen, and your progress, items, heart containers, even your death count got written right to the disc. The system could even flag if you'd unlocked the second quest. For 1986, that was cutting-edge convenience. But then came 1987 and the gold NES cartridge, where Nintendo had a problem. The NES didn't use discs, and there was no way to write data, so the developers had to invent one. Thus, the team implemented a battery-backed memory system within the game cartridge itself, a groundbreaking innovation for its time. The technology used a small CR2032 lithium battery paired with a section of non-volatile RAM, or NVRAM, allowing the cartridge to store data even when powered off. When players saved their game, that data was written to the memory chip and remained intact until the battery died, which, back in the 1980s, typically lasted 5 to 10 years. This made The Legend of Zelda the first console game to include an internal battery save feature, fundamentally changing the way players interacted with long-form games. That's how Zelda became the first widely released NES cartridge with battery-backed saving. When you chose Save from the Game Over screen, it wasn't magic. It was your progress being written to that battery-powered RAM. On the NES, it worked like this. You registered your name on the File Select screen, played until you died, and then saw 3 options: Continue, Save, or Retry. Selecting Save wrote everything you'd done to the cartridge. But here's the secret part most players missed. You could actually save without dying. All you had to do was pause the game, grab Controller 2, and press Up and A. That key combo opened the same Continue, Save, Retry menu. It's one of those things everyone swore was a cheat code, but nope, it was right there in Nintendo's own manual, just buried in the small print. That right there was elite ball knowledge during school. That little battery did more than just save your hearts. It changed how games were designed. With battery saves, Nintendo could finally make a long-form adventure that remembered your entire state, items, map progress, dungeon flags, even the second quest trigger. It turned a weekend rental into a true multi-session epic, something the press later called a structural evolution for console gaming. This shift set the standard for decades of game design. After Zelda, titles like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest III, and Metroid adopted similar save systems, and saving your game became a core expectation rather than a luxury. In essence, The Legend of Zelda didn't just give players an open world, it gave them ownership of their journey. By introducing the save function, Nintendo bridged the gap between fleeting arcade sessions and long-term storytelling, transforming video games from short challenges into personal epics. That single innovation laid the foundation for modern RPGs, open-world games, and narrative adventures alike. And yes, the manuals even included early data safety warning stuff, like "Don't turn off the power while saving," a sentence that became synonymous with the concept of saving in video games moving on. If saving is essential to modern gaming and Zelda, it's essential to subscribe here. Hit that subscribe. It helps more than you know. The Legend of Zelda didn't just invent the save system. It also quietly introduced one of gaming's most enduring post-game traditions, New Game Plus, known in Zelda's case as the Second Quest. This feature fundamentally redefined replayability in video games, turning what could have been a one-and-done adventure into a deeper, more challenging, and more mysterious experience. When players defeated Ganon and rescued Princess Zelda for the first time, they were rewarded not just with the ending, but with a new version of the game, unlocked on the same cartridge, the Second Quest. Unlike typical hard modes found in later games, the Second Quest in The Legend of Zelda was not a simple difficulty increase. It was a complete rearrangement of the world. Dungeons were redesigned from scratch. item locations were moved, and secrets were hidden in entirely new places. Even experienced players found themselves lost all over again. The overworld map looked familiar, but many of its landmarks led to different results, creating a sense of both deja vu and discovery. A brilliant design trick that made the same assets feel brand new. The enemies in the second quest were tougher. Dungeons used new mechanics like invisible walls and false entrances, and puzzle logic became more complex, forcing players to unlearn everything they thought they knew. For example, bombable walls that led to treasure in the first quest might lead nowhere in the second, and some secret rooms could only be reached by walking through solid walls, something never hinted at in the original run. Even the text and enemy placements were altered to keep veterans on edge. What's remarkable is that The Legend of Zelda didn't advertise this feature. It was a reward for mastery and curiosity. In the original NES release, players could access the second quest automatically after finishing the game once, or by entering the name Zelda as their file name at the start screen, unlocking it immediately. This subtle inclusion rewarded exploration, not just within the game world, but within the cartridge itself, a meta layer of discovery that felt almost secret. From a design standpoint, the second quest was revolutionary because it introduced replayability as a core part of the experience, not just as repetition for higher scores. It recognized that players who finished the game weren't done, they were ready for more. The concept of replaying a game with new layouts, enemies, and challenges would later inspire countless New Game Plus systems in other franchises, from Chrono Trigger and Resident Evil 4 to Dark Souls and Nier Automata. The Zelda in The Legend of Zelda isn't just a random princess name. It's literally borrowed from real-world history. Shigeru Miyamoto has said that Princess Zelda was named after Zelda Fitzgerald, the novelist and wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald. The New Yorker spells it out clearly. Miyamoto named his princess for her, simply because he liked the sound of the name. He just thought Zelda had a beautiful ring to it, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. It sounds elegant, timeless, and just a little mysterious. Exactly what you'd want for the heroine of a myth. In Hyrule Historia, the official compendium of the game that preserves developer notes, Miyamoto's own foreword recalls that a company planner pitched the idea of framing the story like a storybook legend about an eternal beauty at the center of a mythic world. That lined up perfectly with the name Zelda that Miyamoto already liked. So The Legend of Zelda became a deliberate choice, a title that sounded royal, ancient, and recurring. It told players from the start, this isn't just one hero's journey, it's a legend retold through generations. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, even took it way further, canonizing that logic in-universe. In the official manual, a tragedy had struck the royal family long ago. A sleeping spell was cast on an earlier Princess Zelda, and the prince decreed that every female descendant of the royal line would be named Zelda, so the memory of that event would never fade. It's one of those small bits of lore that most players miss, but it actually explains why every game can keep the same title and still tell a completely different story. Well, one of those names is down now, but if you ask why Link, of all names, I would tell you that it sounds hella cool. But if you ask the devs, they'd tell you something completely different and something more meaningful. In Iwata Asks, Nintendo's developers explained that Link was meant to be a symbol, the connection between the player and the world. The hero changes, but he always acts as the link between you and Hyrule. That's why the game isn't called The Legend of Link. The name Zelda keeps the series grounded in myth, while Link stays flexible. A new incarnation, a new generation, a new player stepping into the same timeless legend. Everyone remembers the old man before the cave. You can actually ignore the old man's advice and walk out of the cave with no sword at all. Yep, the game gives you the freedom to start your adventure completely unarmed. When you first boot up the NES Classic, there's no cutscene, no tutorial, no press A to attack, just an open field, a cave, and curiosity. Step inside, inside, and an old man offers you the wooden sword with the now immortal line, "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this." But here's the twist. You don't have to. You can walk right past him, skip the sword entirely, and just wander into Hyrule defenseless. That little bit of freedom didn't just end with the NES era. Fans turned it into a full-blown community challenge. Today, swordless runs have their own speedrun category on speedrun.com, and guides on GameFAQs document how far you can actually get without ever picking up a sword. The usual goal: reach Ganon's room, no blades, no excuses. Players found creative ways to survive, bombing enemies, using the boomerang for stuns, setting things on fire with the candle, or sniping with the bow. By the time you add in the magical wand, it's almost a completely different game, one that feels half puzzle, half stealth. But there is a wall in the original NES that no one can beat, not even the best swordless runners. In the original NES version, Ganon can only be damaged by sword hits. You can make it through every dungeon, grab every item, and even face him head on, but unless you land those initial sword strikes, you can't make him visible for the silver arrow finisher. Bombs, fire, or the wand won't trigger the phase change. That's why true swordless runs end the moment you enter Ganon's chamber. You've beaten everything except the unbreakable rule: you can't kill the King of Evil without a blade. Refusing the sword doesn't just make the game harder, it transforms it. Suddenly, exploration is about avoidance, not combat. You start thinking in terms of resources, timing, and risk management. You rely on bombs, boomerangs, and fire instead of brute strength. Community write-ups of swordless routing shows how shockingly flexible Zelda 1's systems were, even in 1986. The game doesn't lock you down for breaking its rules. It just shrugs and says, okay, figure it out. And that's the magic of it. The freedom is real, the consequences are real, and the curiosity is yours. You can walk out of that cave and play for hours without ever touching a sword, but the legend won't end until you finally pick it up. The original Lost Woods in The Legend of Zelda used a secret path so cryptic that most players never figured it out on their own. The correct route is north, west, south, west. Miss even one direction, and the forest loops you back to the beginning forever. If you grew up thinking the exit was north, west, south, east, don't worry, you're not alone. It's one of the most common mix-ups in the entire series, and there's a good reason for it. The Lost Hills nearby uses a completely different rule. Go north 4 times to reach level 5. 2 mazes, 2 patterns, and no clear in-game rules to separate them. The only way to learn the right path wasn't through trial and error, it was through a paid tip. Somewhere in Hyrule, there's an old woman who gives you the clue if you hand over enough rupees. She says, go north, west, south, west to the Forest of Maze. That's the entire hint. It's technically clear, but the English phrasing is awkward enough to sound like a riddle. Legends of Localization notes that the Japanese line is smoother and more natural, but the NES translation added just enough ambiguity to make players doubt themselves. Kids would scribble that line on a notepad and try every possible combination like a maniac. It felt like the game was messing with you, and honestly, that was the point. That moment teaches one of Zelda's oldest lessons. You're supposed to feel lost, because the joy comes from finally finding your way out. The Lost Woods idea didn't just stop there. Nintendo kept remixing it for decades. In Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, the forest returned as an overworld labyrinth, hiding the path to the town of Saria, requiring players to find the correct route through nearly identical screens, reinforcing the importance of exploration and trial and error learning. In A Link to the Past, the Lost Woods became a misty labyrinth that hides the Master Sword itself, a mythic version of that same design. A Link Between Worlds echoed A Link to the Past version, leading players through fog and song to claim the Master Sword once again. In Ocarina of Time, the maze returns as a network of tunnels where the trick is to follow the music instead of directions. Majora's Mask reimagined the forest, not as a navigational challenge, but as a symbolic space, the haunting area through which Link chases Skull Kid and transitions into the parallel world of Termina, representing a passage between life, loss, and transformation. In Twilight Princess, the Lost Woods returned as the Sacred Grove, where Link followed Skull Kid's lantern and music in a game of hide-and-seek, blending nostalgia with puzzle solving. In Breath of the Wild, it comes back again, this time as a fog that literally teleports you out unless you follow environmental cues like torch embers or the direction of the wind. Finally, Tears of the Kingdom in 2023 inverted the classic design by forcing players to approach the Lost Woods from below, traveling through the depths to dispel the gloom corrupting the forest and reach the Korok domain. Zelda is filled with secrets everywhere. It might be a hidden cave, a secret shop, or one of those mysterious moblins who hands you rupees with the line, "It's a secret to everybody." That one sentence became an emblem of how Zelda thought about discovery, not as hand-holding, but as reward through curiosity. You could bomb a suspicious wall and uncover a hidden merchant, burn a lonely bush and find a secret staircase, the most famous one being the entrance to level 8 in the first quest. Push a single block after clearing a dungeon room, and suddenly a staircase appears beneath your feet. None of this was random. The game quietly trained players to build habits: bomb, burn, and push, the same verbs that would define the series' puzzle language for decades. What's incredible is how little the game told you outright. There were no cracks in the walls, no shiny indicators. Nintendo deliberately kept the screen clean and the world opaque, but they didn't abandon you completely either. They offloaded guidance to the manual and that iconic fold-out map. The booklet literally told you to make an adventure map, printed the overworld as a grid, and drop sly nudges like use the candle to burn trees and find the hidden entrance to the level 8 labyrinth. It wasn't about giving you answers, it was about teaching you how to think like a treasure hunter. Of course, curiosity sometimes came with consequences. Some caves housed that cranky old man who'd scold you with, "Pay me for the door repair charge." It was Nintendo's way of saying, be observant, not reckless. Every wrong bomb or burned bush cost you rupees, and every success makes you a little wiser. The whole world was a puzzle box that punished brute force and rewarded intuition. Before facts and YouTube, all of this became living folklore. Kids drew homemade maps on graph paper, traded secret coordinates in school hallways, and argued about which tree hid a dungeon. Then, a couple of years later, Nintendo Power started printing those same playground legends, maps, routes, and full strategies, transforming rumor into reference. That balance of mystery, consequence, and discovery is exactly why people still remember Zelda 1's overworld as something special. The aha moments we had in the game are golden, and it's nothing shy of legendary. Talking about the mysteries and little secrets, how could we not talk about the dungeons? One of the coolest things about the dungeons, they were all hand-drawn on paper. The original Legend of Zelda was literally drawn on graph paper. No fancy level editors, no tile tools, just pencils, rulers, and imagination. In Iwata Asks, the developers even showed the first hand-sketched dungeon map. Miyamoto and the team built Zelda like a giant jigsaw puzzle, each room a single square, carefully fit together to maximize the limited memory of the Famicom Disk System. They weren't just designing mazes, they were designing rhythm, a feeling of tension and release, exploration and discovery, one screen at a time. There were 9 dungeons in total, which the original manual proudly calls the 9 labyrinths. Each one tested players differently, and each one had its own identity, not just in gameplay, but in shape. Level 1 was the Eagle, its map forming spread wings across the grid. Level 7 was the Demon, a menacing silhouette of horns and symmetry. In between came the Moon, the Manji, the Snake, the Lizard, the Dragon, the Lion, and finally Death Mountain, Ganon's fortress and the ultimate trial. And here's the wild part. These shapes weren't visible unless you completed the dungeon map. Players often didn't realize until much later that the layouts literally spelled out creatures, symbols, and myths. It's one of those quiet details that makes you appreciate just how much thought was packed into every square inch of the NES's memory. Finding the dungeon was an adventure of its own. Some entrances were obvious, like Level 1's hollow tree trunk. Others were hidden in plain sight. Burn a single lone bush to reveal Level 8. Bomb a cliff wall to open Level 2. Or play the recorder to drain a pond and expose Level 7. Half the fun was just figuring out how to get in. Once inside, the dungeons taught you Zelda's puzzle language. Locked doors demanded keys, compasses pointed to hidden treasures, and pushable blocks revealed secret staircases or one-way passages. The rooms weren't just obstacles, they were lessons. Each dungeon trained you to notice patterns and trust your intuition a little more. If all the dungeons were like puzzles, the bosses felt like a classroom with a test for the final, because each one taught you something new about how the game wanted you to think. Dodongo, for example, couldn't be hurt by normal attacks. You had to feed it bombs, literally walk up and drop them into its path. That moment quietly teaches the player, sometimes brute force doesn't work, experimentation does. Manhandla, the giant flower-like creature, punished panic. Swing too wildly, and you chop off one of its heads, only to make it move faster and more erratic. Suddenly, mashing buttons was dangerous. The only way to win was precision. Goma, the one-eyed spider guardian, took the opposite approach. She barely gave you a window to attack. Her eye opened for just a heartbeat, forcing you to wait, line up your shot, and fire an arrow with perfect timing. Patience, not aggression, was the real weapon there. And then there's Aquamentus, the first boss, the dragon waiting in Level 1's Eagle Dungeon. He's simple by modern standards, but he's the perfect test of everything the early game taught you. Movement, spacing, pattern recognition. If you'd mastered the basics, you walked out alive. If not, you started over. Each fight was a small revelation, a new rule hidden behind spectacle. The bosses didn't need dialogue or tutorials. They taught you through failure. You'd die once, learn the rule, and then walk back in knowing exactly what to do. Even now, decades later, you can see those same lessons echo in the series. Every Zelda boss, from Ocarina's Phantom Ganon to Breath of the Wild's Monkey Ma's Koshia, still follows that rhythm. Confusion, experimentation, mastery. It's the original language of Zelda, and it all started with a handful of 8-bit monsters teaching players how to think one boss at a time. And finishing Ganon in the final area, Death Mountain, felt like graduating. The original Japanese release of The Legend of Zelda on the Famicom Disk System, or FDS, in 1986 contained several fascinating differences compared to the later NES cartridge version released internationally. These differences highlight not only how early video game technology evolved across regions, but also how cultural and hardware limitations shape player experiences in unique ways. First and foremost, the Famicom Disk System version benefited from the extra audio capabilities of the disc hardware. The FDS had an additional sound channel, which allowed for richer, more layered background music and sound effects. As a result, the original Japanese Zelda had slightly higher sound quality. A warmer, fuller rendition of Koji Kondo's iconic score. When the game was localized for the NES, it had to be ported to a cartridge format, which lacked that extra audio channel. This meant that some of the music lost depth and texture, giving the NES version a more minimalistic sound. While players outside Japan never noticed, the difference is striking when the two versions are compared side by side today. Another subtle but meaningful difference lies in the dungeon layouts. Some rooms in the Famicom Disk version were arranged slightly differently or had different enemy placements and item locations. These adjustments were likely made during the localization process to refine pacing or difficulty. A few visual details, such as certain wall tiles and door alignments, were also cleaned up or modified for the NES release. While the changes didn't drastically alter gameplay, they show that Nintendo was already treating localization as a form of creative adaptation, not just translation. Perhaps the most famous and quirky difference, though, involved the Famicom controller's built-in microphone. Unlike the NES controllers, which had only buttons and a D-pad, the Famicom's second controller included a small microphone that could detect loud noises. This feature was used in The Legend of Zelda in a particularly inventive way. One of the enemy types, the Paul's voice, a rabbit-like monster, could be instantly defeated by shouting or blowing into the microphone. The in-game manual even hinted that Paul's voice hated loud noises. However, when the game was brought to the NES in the West, this feature was removed entirely. The NES controllers did not have microphones, and because of a translation oversight, the game's manual in English still mentioned that Paul's voice dislikes loud noise, confusing countless players for years. Western fans tried every imaginable trick, playing loudly, using bombs, or even tapping the TV, to no effect. It wasn't until decades later that players learned the truth. The mechanics simply didn't exist outside Japan. The Famicom Disk System version also included faster load times for saving and overworld transitions, since it could rewrite data directly onto the disk. Another innovation lost in the cartridge port. However, this came with trade-offs. The magnetic discs were prone to corruption, meaning Japanese players sometimes lost their progress entirely, which helped motivate Nintendo to develop a battery-backed save feature for the NES cartridge, an innovation that would become standard in future generations. In The Legend of Zelda, the recorder, also called the flute, served more purposes than just fast travel. While players often used it to warp between completed dungeons, the item also had hidden secondary effects that added layers of mystery to the game's world. Playing the recorder in specific overworld spots could reveal hidden entrances, such as secret stairways or hidden caves, encouraging experimentation and exploration. Additionally, it had a unique combat function. When used in certain dungeons, it could weaken or drive away specific enemies, most notably Digdogger, a boss that would shrink or split apart when exposed to its sound. These multiple uses made the recorder a perfect example of early Nintendo design, one item serving several creative, secret purposes that rewarded player curiosity. One of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes facts about The Legend of Zelda concerns the series' first main antagonist, Ganon. Early concept art for the game depicted him as a humanoid demon, more in line with traditional fantasy villains seen in games and literature of the time. This version of Ganon was tall, menacing, and relatively generic, blending into the archetype of the horned or robed Dark Lord common in 1980s media. However, the development team, led by Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, decided to redesign him into a pig-like creature. The change was deliberate. They wanted Ganon to be instantly recognizable and visually distinct from other villains in games or folklore. By turning him into a grotesque, anthropomorphic pig, they created a monster that was both memorable and unsettling, standing out in the small, pixelated NES graphics. This design choice also subtly reflected Ganon's personality and role as a gluttonous, corrupting force. Pig imagery symbolizing greed, gluttony, and base instincts, aligning with his theft of the Triforce of Power and the devastation he brings to Hyrule. Interestingly, this early pig-like design established a visual template for future incarnations of Ganon in the Zelda series. Even when he occasionally returns in humanoid form, such as Ganondorf, the pig-inspired features, stocky build, tusks, and bestial traits, remain, reinforcing his inhuman and standout stand out in a limited graphical environment, ensuring that players could immediately recognize both the villain and the tone of the encounter. In short, Ganon's transformation from a generic humanoid demon to a pig-like monster was a masterstroke of early character design, combining visual distinctiveness, symbolic meaning, and gameplay clarity, a choice that helped define the identity of The Legend of Zelda's titular villain for decades to come. One of the most intriguing discoveries hidden within The Legend of Zelda comes from data miners and preservationists who, decades after the game's release, uncovered evidence of a cut, unfinished dungeon buried deep in the game's code. This finding revealed that the original design of Zelda was even more ambitious than what players ultimately experienced, and it gives a fascinating glimpse into how early developers at Nintendo pushed the limits of 8-bit technology. When the game was first developed in 1985 to 86, The Legend of Zelda was among the largest and most technically demanding games ever made for the Famicom Disk System. It already featured 9 full dungeons in the first quest, and another set of redesigned dungeons in the second quest, an enormous amount of content for the time. However, data miners examining the ROM in later years discovered unused map data, stray room layouts, and partially coded enemy placements that didn't correspond to any existing dungeon in either quest. This led to the conclusion that a 10th dungeon, or at least one major additional level, had been planned but ultimately scrapped during development. These fragments, though incomplete, reveal the creative trial and error process behind Zelda's design. Some rooms reused tile patterns seen elsewhere, but others contained unique wall structures and item placements that don't appear in any final version. It's possible that this lost dungeon was meant to act as an extra challenge, a secret final test, or even an early prototype for what became the second quest. Developers likely removed it due to memory constraints on the NES cartridge, a common issue in the 8-bit era. Every byte counted, and with the inclusion of the save system and complex overworld data, something had to give. Fans have since reconstructed speculative versions of the missing dungeon using the leftover data, imagining what it might have looked like had it been completed. Some theories suggest it may have inspired the dungeon rearrangements of the second quest, or influenced early planning for Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. The original Zelda sold over 6.51 million copies worldwide and was a commercial hit, and it was clear back then and now as well, this would spawn a franchise. The first Zelda was a masterclass in game design for the franchise, the Holy Bible for it. Naturally, you would go further with it, but Nintendo had something different in mind. Just a year later, on January 14, 1987, in Japan on the Famicom Disk System, with the NES release following in 1988 overseas, Nintendo released Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. And it wasn't just a sequel, it was a complete reinvention. What's interesting is that Zelda 2 wasn't directed by Shigeru Miyamoto this time around. He stayed on as a producer, but the day-to-day direction shifted to Tadashi Sugiyama and Yoichi Yamada from Nintendo's R&D4 team, the same division that had just built Super Mario Bros. These were designers eager to push boundaries, and Miyamoto gave them the freedom to do it. According to development interviews, Sugiyama wanted to expand the world of Zelda and experiment with what Link could do, physically jumping, dueling, casting spells, things that just weren't possible in the original's grid-based structure. The result was one of the boldest sequels Nintendo ever made. Gone was the top-down combat. Instead, Zelda 2 blended a side-scrolling action game with a top-down overworld, throwing fans for a loop. You had towns to explore, NPCs to talk to, magic spells to learn, and experience points to grind. It felt like Zelda had suddenly stepped into RPG territory, part Mario, part Dragon Quest, part Fever Dream. Enemies now dropped XP instead of rupees, and every fight pushed you toward your next level up threshold. When the counter labeled next hit the target number, you could choose to boost attack, life, or magic. That single mechanic made every encounter feel deliberate. Every hit, every dodge, every grind mattered. On top of that, you had a magic meter and a spellbook full of early staples: shield to halve damage, jump for double height, fire to shoot projectiles, with later spells like Reflect, Spell, and Thunder. It was complex, ambitious, and in classic Nintendo fashion, absolutely merciless. Zelda 2 is still infamous for its difficulty, and for good reason. The game added limited lives, and a full game over booted you all the way back to Hyrule Castle. That meant gauntlets like Death Mountain felt like endurance tests, part skill, part stamina, part pure willpower. Enemies like the Dark Nuts were the perfect embodiment of that philosophy. They blocked high and low, baited attacks, and punished every mistake. It wasn't about mashing buttons, it was about spacing, patience, and shield timing. The first Zelda taught curiosity, Zelda 2 taught discipline, and then came one of its coolest ideas, the downward thrust. Learned from a knight in Mido Town, it let Link drop onto enemies with his sword, a move that felt revolutionary on the NES. It even predated Scrooge McDuck's pogo cane jump in DuckTales by 2 years. Later, you'd unlock the up thrust, and suddenly, combat wasn't just flat, it was vertical. Sugiyama's team used those moves to transform every battle into a kind of fencing duel. Link wasn't just a sprite with a sword, he was a character with technique. And when you finally reached the end, past Thunderbird and the game's notorious gauntlets, Zelda 2 gave you one of the most iconic finales in Nintendo history, a duel against your own shadow. That's right, the final boss wasn't Ganon, it was Shadow Link, a mirror of everything you'd learned. Every jump, every block, every down thrust you'd practiced was suddenly coming back at you. It was poetic and brutal all at once, the perfect symbolic finale for a game about growth. That duel gave birth to one of Zelda's most enduring icons, the Dark Link archetype that would return in Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and beyond. Zelda 2 sold over 4.38 million copies worldwide, a big number, but a noticeable drop from the original. It split the fan base right down the middle. Some loved it for its depth and difficulty, others bounced off its harshness, but either way, it left a lasting mark. And looking back, it's clear what Miyamoto and Sugiyama achieved. They didn't just make a sequel, they made a prototype for what Zelda could become. Towns full of stories, combat with weight, and a world that demanded mastery instead of mere exploration. Zelda 2 was the awkward middle child, sure, but it's also the one that grew up first. Because every time Link learns a new skill, every time the series asks you to earn your progress, it's echoing what Sugiyama's team proved back in 1987. Sometimes, the best way to move forward is to take a risk. Zelda 2's boss fight was one of the earliest boss cheese runs you could commit, and this had people going wild. Dark Link, the final boss, your shadow. The fight's meant to be a symbolic duel, a test of everything you've learned about timing, patience, and control. But the fanbase found another way. According to community guides and glitch databases, there's a trick so simple it almost feels like cheating, and it works like magic. Here's what you do. You walk all the way to the left corner of the room, crouch down, and just start stabbing. No fancy dodging, no sword dueling, no deep spiritual reflection. Just hold down and mash attack while facing right. The trick works because of how Dark Link's AI behaves. When you crouch in the far left corner, his movement and block patterns get restricted. His sword swings whiff over your head or clashes harmlessly, and your low jabs hit him every time he lunges forward. Players call it crouch stabbing, and it completely breaks the fight. You can still go toe-to-toe the honorable way, trading blows like a true hero of Hyrule, but why risk it when you can corner camp your inner demon and poke him to death in 5 seconds flat? Even fan wikis admit it. Allow Dark Link to pursue his counterpart and crouch into the left corner and face him. Now keep crouch stabbing him, and he will die shortly. It's one of the oldest speedrunner approved strats in Zelda history, and honestly, it's become part of the series culture at this point. I still remember trying it after hours of getting wrecked by Dark Link and thinking, there's no way that worked. but it did. If you played Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, you probably remember walking into a house in Rudo Town and seeing one of the strangest lines in NES history, "I am error." For decades, players thought this was a translation mistake, or worse, an actual game glitch. But nope, the joke was intentional. In the original Japanese, the character literally introduces himself as, "My name is Error." That's not a mistranslation, that's his name. The man is named Error, written in Japanese as Era. And he's not just a random villager either. He's an actual NPC who later gives you a clue about the island palace. So he's not broken, he's helpful. So when English-speaking kids walked into that house and saw, "I am error," they assumed the line itself was an error, which is honestly kind of poetic. The game doesn't explain him, doesn't contextualize the line, and doesn't even give you a reaction from Link. It just drops this odd, deadpan sentence and moves on. It's so weird, so abrupt. Then it became one of the earliest memes in gaming, decades before we called them memes. One of the most unusual aspects of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, is the complete absence of rupees, making it the only game in the Legend of Zelda series without a currency system. In other Zelda titles, rupees function as a core mechanic, allowing players to purchase items, equipment, and potions from shops. However, Zelda 2 eliminates this entirely, replacing the concept of buying with a structure focused on finding, earning, and learning. Items such as the candle, hammer, and flute are discovered through exploration within palaces or caves rather than bought from merchants. Similarly, consumables like potions are replaced by a magic system, where spells such as Life and Shield fulfill the same purpose at the cost of magic points instead of money. Villages serve functional and narrative purposes, offering free healing or new spells rather than trade or commerce. This design reflects the developer's intention to create a game that felt more like a traditional RPG, emphasizing combat mastery, exploration, and progression through experience points rather than economic management. The leveling system, which allows Link to improve his attack, magic, and life stats through experience rather than purchases, further supports this focus. By removing currency, Zelda 2 encourages players to engage directly with its combat and exploration systems, making every upgrade feel earned through effort instead of simple acquisition. While later entries in the series reinstated rupees and shops to restore the familiar Zelda formula, Zelda 2 remains a fascinating experiment, a self-contained adventure where resource management depends entirely on player skill and discovery rather than wealth or trade. One of the most intriguing story elements in Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, is the concept of two Princess Zeldas, which adds a layer of myth and mystery to the series' lore. The Princess Zelda whom Link seeks to awaken in this game is not the same Zelda he rescued in the first Legend of Zelda. Instead, she is a different Zelda from an ancient era, placed under a powerful sleeping spell long before the events of the first game. This unusual narrative decision created the Zelda naming tradition, an in-universe explanation for why every princess in subsequent titles is named Zelda, regardless of time period or continuity. According to the game's backstory, as revealed in the opening scroll and the manual, this older Zelda was a wise and beautiful princess living in a time when the kingdom of Hyrule was still united and prosperous. After the death of her father, the king, her brother, the new prince, sought the location of a magical treasure known as the Triforce of Courage, a secret only Zelda knew. When she refused to reveal it, the prince's advisor, a magician, became enraged and cast a powerful sleeping spell on her. The magician died in the process, leaving Zelda in an eternal slumber that could only be broken by the discovery of the missing Triforce. Stricken with guilt, the prince decreed that every daughter born to the royal family would henceforth be named Zelda, ensuring that the tragedy would never be forgotten. This lore established a legendary lineage that transcends time, framing the recurring appearance of Princess Zelda in later games as part of a long royal tradition rather than a single individual reincarnating. It also gave Zelda 2 a mythic tone, reinforcing the idea that the series takes place in a cyclical world shaped by recurring heroes, princesses, and evils. The two Zeldas concept became an early narrative foundation for the Zelda timeline's theme of eternal cycles of destiny and renewal, influencing how later titles like Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild explored legacy and reincarnation. Even though later games rarely reference this specific story directly, the tradition it introduced, the naming of every princess as Zelda, remains one of the most enduring pieces of world building in the franchise. At the end of Zelda 2, after Link defeats Dark Link and restores peace to Hyrule by placing the recovered Triforce of Courage alongside the other two Triforce pieces, the magic spell over the ancient Princess Zelda is broken. The final scene shows Zelda awakening from her eternal slumber. As the curtain falls, Link and Zelda are shown together, and just before the screen fades to black, they lean in and kiss. This moment is brief and stylized, typical of NES-era graphics, but unmistakably romantic in tone. What makes this particularly notable is that it's the only canonical depiction of physical affection between Link and Zelda across the entire franchise. Later games often imply a deep emotional bond, partnership, or even romantic tension between them, but Nintendo has always kept their relationship deliberately ambiguous. The Zelda 2 kiss therefore stands as a unique and somewhat mysterious moment, one that hints at affection between the hero of Hyrule and the princess, but was never expanded upon in future entries. It also reflects how early Nintendo storytelling sometimes leaned into classic fairy tale conventions, where the hero's reward for bravery was both peace restored and the affection of the princess. Over time, however, the series evolved toward portraying their relationship as one of mutual duty, respect, and destiny rather than romance, making this scene from Zelda 2 a one-of-a-kind artifact in Zelda history, the only time Link and Zelda's relationship is sealed with an explicit kiss. The full description of the Triforce in Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, is one of the most significant milestones in the series' lore. While the first game, The Legend of Zelda, introduced the concept of the Triforce of Wisdom and the Triforce of Power, it was Zelda 2 that completed the trifecta by introducing the Triforce of Courage, and for the first time, showing the Triforce in its entirety, the now iconic golden triangle composed of 3 interlocking pieces. In the original Legend of Zelda, the player's quest revolves around retrieving the Triforce of Wisdom, which Princess Zelda shatters into 8 fragments to keep it out of Ganon's hands. Meanwhile, Ganon himself possesses the Triforce of Power. The game ends when Link defeats Ganon and reunites the 2 pieces, but the legendary artifact is still incomplete. It's not until Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, that players learn about the 3rd piece, the Triforce of Courage, a sacred relic hidden within the Great Palace, protected by powerful guardians and tests meant only for the true hero. The discovery and retrieval of the Triforce of Courage forms the climax of Zelda 2. Once Link proves his worth by defeating Dark Link, he claims the final piece, uniting all 3 segments, power, wisdom, and courage. For the first time in the series' history, the game's ending scene visually represents this moment, displaying the complete Triforce symbol as it restores balance to Hyrule and awakens the sleeping Princess Zelda. This was the first time the 3-part Triforce symbol, now one of gaming's most recognizable emblems, was shown and canonized in full. It transformed what was once a pair of mystical relics into a trinity of divine forces, representing the goddesses Din, Nehru, and Faror in later lore. Zelda 2 effectively established the philosophical and symbolic foundation of the entire Zelda mythology, the balance of power, wisdom, and courage as the spiritual core of the series. Here's something that still blows my mind. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, quietly planted one of the biggest naming Easter eggs in the entire series. If you walk through Zelda 2's world, you'll find towns named Rauru, Ruto, Saria, Darunia, Naburu, Mido, and the twin settlements Kasuto and Old Kasuto. They sound normal enough when you're playing the NES game, but then jump ahead more than a decade to Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, and suddenly those names come roaring back. In Ocarina of Time, the 6 stages of Hyrule are Rauru, Saria, Darunia, Ruto, Naburu, and Impa. 5 of them share their names directly with the Zelda 2 towns. It's not a coincidence. In a 2002 developer Q&A, Shigeru Miyamoto and Eiji Aonuma confirmed it outright. "We named them after towns in the Adventure of Link, so it would appear that the towns have been named after them." That one line basically locks in the timeline logic. Ocarina of Time takes place before Zelda 2. The heroes and sages of the N64 era eventually become the namesakes of those quiet little towns centuries later. It's such a simple connection, but it adds a layer of myth to the series, like every town in Zelda 2 is a living monument to the ancient sages who once saved Hyrule. There are a couple of fun wrinkles, though. Mido, the Kokiri kid who bullies Link at the start of Ocarina, isn't a sage, but his name still comes from Zelda 2's Mido Town. Fans have speculated for years that he was once considered for sage status. A piece of unused item text even refers to Mido's seal, but that's purely rumor. Nothing in official canon confirms it. And then there's Kasuto, one of the final towns in Zelda 2, which actually exists in two versions: the ruined Old Kasuto and its rebuilt counterpart hidden in the forest. No sage in Ocarina carries that name, though Impa takes the final sage slot. And interestingly, Zelda 2 doesn't have an Impa town. It's the one name that flips places. Still, that link, pun intended, across games is brilliant. Players who grew up on the NES had no idea they were walking through the names of Hyrule's future heroes. And when Ocarina of Time finally arrived, it turned what looked like random NES town names into ancient legend, centuries of lore retrofitted through a clever callback. Even today, Zelda 2 holds the title of the series Black Sheep. Its RPG systems, leveling, XP, limited lives, never came back in full in any mainline sequel. Nintendo learned what worked and quietly shelved what didn't. But here's the twist. The experiment mattered. Towns, magic, structured combat, all of that DNA lived on. Those seeds re-emerged in A Link to the Past, refined in Ocarina of Time, and echoed again in Breath of the Wild's emphasis on skill over stat. So yeah, Zelda 2 might not have been the cozy follow-up fans expected, but it was the growing pains the series needed. It proved that Zelda could evolve, even if evolution meant stumbling a little along the way. By 1991, The Legend of Zelda had already reinvented itself twice, once as an open-world adventure, and once as a side-scrolling RPG experiment. So when Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past on the Super Famicom, this was the moment Zelda became Zelda. The game brought the series back to its top-down roots, but this time, everything was bigger and better. The world of Hyrule felt alive in a way no cartridge before it had managed. The very first minute set the tone, a storm raging outside, thunder echoing through your speakers, a mysterious voice calling out from the castle. That cinematic opening rain, lightning, stealth infiltration, a princess pleading for help immediately felt more immersive than anything the NES could have dreamed of. It wasn't just gameplay anymore, it was drama. The dungeons were another major improvement. Each one felt like a living, breathing structure that felt like it has existed there in the world instead of a collection of rooms. There were multiple floors, puzzles that spanned vertical space, and item-based mechanics that built on themselves. The hookshot, fire rod, and magic hammer all reshaped how you thought about combat and traversal. You weren't just finding items anymore, you were learning how to think in 3 dimensions inside a 2D world. And then came A Link to the Past's biggest trick: the light world and dark world mechanic. Halfway through the game, you realize the world you've been exploring has a twisted twin, the same geography, but corrupted, rearranged, and full of mirrored puzzles. A mountain in one world might be a pit in the other. A bridge might only exist after shifting between realities. It doubled the map and turned the entire game into one long, interconnected puzzle. That duality, light and dark, freedom and fate, became the series' signature theme for decades. Even the bosses leveled up. Moldorm could knock you off the stage, forcing you to restart the fight. Helmasaur King made you break its mask before you could even hurt it. And Aghanim's spell reflection duel foreshadowed the kind of cinematic boss design that would define later Zelda games. They weren't just monsters, they were encounters. And out in the overworld, Hyrule itself finally felt alive. Villagers ran, birds scattered, and the world was filled with secrets waiting behind cracked walls, hidden caves, caves, and heart piece challenges. The flute warp, the running man, the hidden grove with fairies, all of it made the world feel like it was breathing, and holding it all together was Koji Kondo's soundtrack, the heartbeat of the entire experience. The Hyrule Castle theme, the Dark World theme, that iconic overworld march, all written to push the SNES sound chip to its limit. Even today, those melodies define what adventure sounds like. Critically and commercially, A Link to the Past was an instant masterpiece. Reviewers hailed it as the best game on the SNES. It sold millions and still sits on countless greatest games of all time lists. But more than that, it's the moment Zelda found its identity. Everything the first two games had experimented with, the freedom, the structure, the sense of mystery, was finally balanced into something cohesive and timeless. No more trial and error extremes, no more awkward side-scrolling detours, just pure, perfectly tuned adventure. It's why A Link to the Past became the template for the series going forward. Dual worlds, puzzle-driven items, rich overworlds, emotional storytelling, and unforgettable music. If Zelda 2 was the experiment, A Link to the Past was the graduation. It was the moment when every piece clicked and the legend truly became a legend. When people talk about A Link to the Past's light and dark worlds, they usually describe it like two completely separate maps, two versions of Hyrule stacked on top of each other. But technically, that's not quite true. Behind the scenes, the light and dark worlds actually sit on the same map grid. ROM hackers and reverse engineers have shown that both worlds share the same coordinate system, the same lattice of squares, just with different tiles, objects, and enemies layered on top. Think of it like a table with 128 little squares. The light world fills them with green grass, castles, and villages. The dark world uses the exact same table, but swaps in dead trees, corrupted temples, and the towering pyramid of power where Hyrule Castle used to stand. It's genius data design. Nintendo used a table-driven map system, where each coordinate references a square definition. The light and dark worlds just call those squares with alternate graphics and entities. So when you cross dimensions using the magic mirror, the game isn't loading a new world, it's remapping the same one. And it's not a perfect one-to-one mirror either. Some terrain changes are deliberate. Cliffs block new paths, bridges disappear, and lakes dry up. Those little differences make every flip between worlds feel like deja vu. You recognize where you are, but something's wrong. It's the perfect kind of design dissonance. Familiar geography turned unsettling. Why did they do it? Because A Link to the Past had to fit on an 8 megabit cartridge, just 1 megabyte. Miyamoto himself has said they were up against the memory limit, compressing data and shelving ideas to make it all fit. So rather than building two full overworlds from scratch, Nintendo pulled off one of the smartest sleights of hand in 16-bit history. They reused the same grid, changed the art, tweaked the events, and doubled the game's sense of scale. And that choice wasn't just clever engineering, it was brilliant design. Because the moment you use the mirror for the first time, your brain instantly connects the dots. This is the same world, corrupted. The mountains are in the same place. The rivers still flow, but twisted. That instant recognition gives the dark world emotional weight. You're not just exploring a new space, you're confronting the shadow of the one you already knew. It makes sense with the narrative of the game too, as Ganon, who had been trapped within the sacred realm by the 7 sages in order to stop him conquering Hyrule, turns the sacred realm, or his prison, into this twisted depiction of Hyrule. The dark world is ultimately a pale reflection of Hyrule, and it serves to reflect Ganon's inner desire, as well as Link's urgency to complete and succeed in his quest. Every copy of A Link to the Past hides a secret, a little blue-tiled cave stuffed with rupees, and one of the strangest messages in Nintendo history. If you somehow glitch the game's transition logic, instead of crashing, Link will suddenly appear inside a small, silent room lined with 45 shimmering blue rupees. On the wall, there's a telepathy tile that reads, "My name is Chris Houlihan. This is my top secret room. Keep it between us, okay? No bosses, glitches, no traps, no clues, just rupees and a mysterious name that baffled players for decades. What's actually happening is pure Nintendo ingenuity. The developers built the Chris Houlihan room as a failsafe. If the game ever couldn't find a valid underground destination during a screen transition, rather than crashing, it would warp Link to this backup space, an error handler room hidden deep in the game's data. Reverse engineers later confirmed it as a unique room ID, meant purely to catch bad entrance logic. It was never supposed to be seen, but of course, players found it anyway. Speedrunners and glitch hunters eventually discovered that by chaining Pegasus boot dashes and manipulating screen transitions, sometimes using bomb recoil to push Link right to the edge, you could force the game to misread your position and trigger the warp. One popular setup starts near the Sanctuary, chaining transitions east toward Hyrule Castle until the system panics, and boom, you're in Chris Houlihan's secret vault. Collect the rupees, leave through the door, and you'll respawn safely near Link's house. 225 rupees richer. So who is Chris Houlihan? That mystery lasted almost 30 years. The name first appeared in the North American SNES release, nowhere else. Other regions have the same room, but the message is generic, just calling it a top secret room. For years, fans thought Chris Houlihan might be a developer alias or inside joke, but in 2020, a YouTuber finally tracked down the real Chris, and the truth turned out to be pure 90s Nintendo. Back in 1990, Nintendo Power ran a contest promising to include the winner's name in a future Nintendo game. Chris didn't even enter. His dad did, submitting his son's name. When A Link to the Past came in the US in 1992, the localization team swapped in the Chris Houlihan message to fulfill that promise. Chris himself wasn't much of a gamer, which helped explain the decades of silence. Even Nintendo Power editor Scott Pelland later confirmed the story. It was real, just forgotten. And that's why the secret room became a legend. It started as a safety net to prevent crashes, but became one of gaming's earliest mysteries. A real person's name tucked inside a fantasy world. In the GBA remake, the bug that led players there was fixed, and the message was removed. The room still exists in the code, but you'll never see it without glitches or cheats. Before A Link to the Past became the refined masterpiece we know today, Shigeru Miyamoto briefly imagined something totally different, a party-based Zelda. In a late 80s chat with Dragon Quest creator Yuji Horii, Miyamoto described an early concept for what he called Zelda 3. Instead of a lone hero, you'd control a team of 3 characters, a fighter like Elf, essentially Link, a magic user, and a girl who looked a little like a fairy who would scout ahead. You wouldn't control them all at once, but rather choose who to send out, like an action game crossed with a JRPG. Miyamoto compared it to strategy adventures, where one character explores while another stays safe, a kind of tactical rotation between a brawler, a mage, and a support scout. It's wild to imagine now, but in 1989, Nintendo was clearly toying with RPG-style party dynamics. And sitting across from Yuji Horii, the man who invented the JRPG template with Dragon Quest, it's easy to see how the idea sparked. So why didn't it make it into A Link to the Past? The short answer? Space, scope, and focus. The SNES cart shipped at just 8 megabits, about 1 megabyte of data, and Miyamoto later admitted they were right at the limit. He talked openly about ideas that had to be cut, brush fires that would spread from the lamp, water ditches that changed dynamically, and countless other nice-to-haves that simply didn't fit. A full party system with extra sprites, AI pathing, and separate mechanics would have devoured that memory budget in an instant, so the team made the smart call: cut complexity, sharpen focus. Link to the Past became a singular hero adventure, where every byte of ROM went toward its dual-world design, multi-layer dungeons, and a fluid, intuitive combat loop. No menus, no party juggling, just pure seamless play. Still, it's fascinating to trace what that lost idea left behind. That fairy-like girl who acted as a recon scout, you can feel her DNA echoing through Zelda's future. A few years later, Ocarina of Time would introduce Navi, the literal fairy companion guiding you through the 3D world. And in later games such as Spirit Tracks, and spin-offs such as Hyrule Warriors, finally let Zelda herself join the adventure as a controllable spirit, a spiritual nod to that original multi-character dream. Even Nintendo's eventual co-op experiments, 4 Swords, Four Swords Adventures, Triforce Heroes sound like echoes of that late 80s brainstorm. What if Zelda was a team sport? In the end, A Link to the Past didn't need a party to feel epic. It found power and focus. One hero, one world, well, two worlds. One perfectly tuned adventure. But somewhere deep in the design notes of 1989, there's a little what-if scribble that still makes fans smile. A Zelda where Link, a mage, and a fairy Girl Scout went on a quest together. A dream that never shipped but quietly shaped what came after. Here's something you might not know. In Japan, A Link to the Past wasn't called A Link to the Past at all. Its original title is The Legend of Zelda: Triforce of the Gods. That's the name printed right on the Super Famicom box and manual, and it perfectly matches the story the game tells. The Japanese version opens with a myth about the three golden goddesses who created the world: Din, Nehru, and Faror, leaving behind the sacred Triforce as the balance of power, wisdom, and courage. So in context, Triforce of the Gods makes total sense. It's not metaphorical, it's literal. But when the game came west in 1992, Nintendo of America changed the title to A Link to the Past. Why? Because at the time, Nintendo of America had a standing rule: no overt religious references in its localizations. That policy covered everything. No crosses, no God, no prayer, no holy symbols, anything that might court controversy in Western markets. So Triforce of the Gods became something safer and more broadly appealing: A Link to the Past. And this wasn't the only change. The English localization softened other religious cues too. In the Japanese material, Akanim was framed more like a priest or cleric, a servant of divine power gone astray. In English, he became a wizard. Even the Hylian script, which had hieroglyphic-like markings in the original, was adjusted for the Western release. None of this altered the game's core, but it's fascinating to see how Nintendo of America walked that tightrope in the early 90s, preserving myth while avoiding God. Every Zelda fan knows it's a bad idea to hit a Kuko, but did you know A Link to the Past is where that entire tradition began? This was their first appearance: fluffy little chickens wandering around Kakariko Village, pecking the ground, minding their own business. And because every player was armed with a shiny new sword and a bottomless curiosity, the obvious question was, what happens if I hit one? At first, nothing dramatic, just a puff of feathers and a squawk. But keep swinging, about 30 or so hits, and suddenly the screen erupts in chaos. Out of nowhere, a flock of furious Kukos dive bombs Link from every direction. Unstoppable, screeching vengeance incarnate. You can't kill them, you can't block them, you can't even fight back. The only way to survive is to run. Dash into a house, change screens, do anything to escape. It's pure slapstick panic, and it's glorious. Behind the scenes, it's a simple counter system. The game tracks how many times you've attacked a Kuko. Once you cross that hidden threshold, roughly 35 hits, depending on your timing, it flips a flag and triggers the swarm routine. And from that moment, the chickens become indestructible death torpedoes. Even the Dark World version of Hyrule has its own Kuko-like birds that mimic the same behavior. Angry, relentless, hilarious. So why did Nintendo even add this? It's not just a joke, it's a lesson. A Link to the Past is filled with small reactive touches that make the world feel alive. Villagers who call guards if you break into their houses, animals that scatter, NPCs who react if you draw your sword too close. The Kuko Swarm is the ultimate version of that idea. A funny, non-lethal punishment that says, hey, don't bully the locals. You don't die, you just get humbled. And it stuck. Every major Zelda since has carried the Kuko code in its DNA. From Ocarina of Time's Barnyard Blitz to Breath of the Wild's flying feathery fury. Even Minish Cap and Twilight Princess reused the swarm as a universal inside joke. Not every secret in A Link to the Past wants to kill you. Some just want to pay you. And one of them even stars Mario. If you wander through Kakariko Village, you might notice a framed picture of Mario hanging on the wall in one of the houses. And if you walk up to it, press A, and pull, rupees start falling out. Yep, Mario literally pays you rent. It's not a glitch or a weird Easter egg, it's a deliberate secret. That portrait is part of a whole hidden hole spot system Nintendo baked into the game. There are about a dozen objects scattered around Hyrule that reward you with rupees when you tug them. Rugs, curtains, paintings, you name it. The Mario frame is just the most famous one because, well, it's Mario. You'll find that specific house on the east side of Kakariko Village, near the woman who will call the guards if you get too close outside. Keep your distance, slip inside quietly, and you'll spot Mario's smiling face right on the wall. Pull it down and boom, a shower of blue rupees, usually around 15 to 20 total, each worth 5 apiece. Not a fortune, but a satisfying little gotcha moment for anyone curious enough to try. And that's what makes it so clever. A Link to the Past constantly rewards curiosity. Dash a weird wall, lift a suspicious rock, pull a random switch, and something happens. The Mario portrait is the perfect embodiment of that design philosophy. It's a reward for players who poke at the edges of the world. It's also a cheeky fourth wall moment, Nintendo winking at itself. By 1991, Mario was already a global icon, so sneaking him into Zelda's universe as a hidden rupee dispenser was a low-key crossover before crossovers were cool. If you've ever seen those Mario cameos and Zelda compilations, this Kakariko painting is always at the top of the list. What's even cooler is how deep the system goes. Fans later documented that there are around a dozen pull spots across the game, all hidden in plain sight. The Mario portrait is just your first taste. There are 11 more scattered through Hyrule, waiting for anyone nosy enough to tug everything that isn't nailed down. Could you imagine playing the legendary game without the Master Sword? Every great hero needs a legendary weapon, and for The Legend of Zelda, that moment finally arrived in A Link to the Past. This was the very first appearance of the Master Sword, the blade of evil's bane, the weapon destined to seal away darkness. Before this, the original NES game only had the magical sword, a strong weapon, sure, but just another upgrade. It wasn't legendary yet. It wasn't mythic. That changed here. To claim it, players had to prove their worth by gathering the 3 pendants of virtue: courage from the Eastern Palace, wisdom from the Desert Palace, and power from the Tower of Hera. Only then could Link enter the Lost Woods, find the resting place of the sword, and pull it from its pedestal, bathed in divine light, as the music swelled and beams of energy filled the screen. That one moment did more than just give Link a new weapon. It gave Zelda its Excalibur. The Master Sword wasn't just another item. It became the heart of the franchise's mythology. The idea that a chosen hero could draw a sacred blade to banish evil. That's Zelda's creation myth in action. Every future entry, from Ocarina of Time to Skyward Sword, would build on that lore. And in A Link to the Past, the sword isn't just symbolic, it's practical too. You need it to progress. The moment you pull it, the game changes. You can finally cut through the electric barrier around Hyrule Castle Tower, something no other weapon can break. You even use it to slash through the castle's heavy curtains, opening the path to your first showdown with Aghanim, the Dark Wizard, manipulating the world from the shadows. That's what makes this moment so genius. It's not just a story beat, it's a design gate. Until you've proven yourself with the pendants, you can't move forward. Once you have the Master Sword, the world literally opens up, and from that day forward, the series would carry it like a sacred tradition. Every hero, every generation, every timeline, they all reach a point where destiny says, it's time to pull the sword. But don't be too excited to grab it, because you can reach the Master Sword too early. So what if you reach the Master Sword too early? Turns out, A Link to the Past really doesn't like that idea, because if you manage to break the game and enter the Lost Woods pedestal room before you're supposed to, the sword isn't there. Instead, you might find something much weirder: a writhing, bouncing sprite. Sometimes it looks like a floating head, sometimes like a mangled enemy. Fans call it the Master Sword Demon. It's not intentional, of course. It's one of those perfect, spooky byproducts of 16-bit logic gone wrong. Here's what's really happening under the hood. The game's engine decides what objects appear in a room using a system of room flags and sprite tables. Normally, when you've rescued Zelda and collected all 3 pendants, those flags tell the game, spawn the Master Sword here. But if you somehow force the game to load that room before those story conditions are met, say through an exploration glitch or sequence break, the engine doesn't know what to do. It still tries to populate the pedestal's object slot, but since the proper flag isn't set, it grabs whatever random sprite ID happens to be sitting in memory. That's when you get the demon, a scrambled sprite that hops or jitters in place, often making eerie sounds or behaving like an enemy in the wrong context. To the game, it's just garbage data, but to the player, it looks like the sword itself has been corrupted. Speedrunners and glitch hunters figured out how to make it happen years ago. It usually involves scroll manipulation or screen wrap tricks that let Link slip into the Lost Woods pedestal area early, especially during the early rain sequence, or before finishing the pendant quest. The exact setup changes by route, but the principle's always the same. Enter a room the game hasn't prepared for yet, and the code starts hallucinating. Hyrule would be in shambles if you didn't grab the Master Sword, but there is a boss in Link to the Past who can be defeated with the Bug Catcher. Alright, you've got the Master Sword, you've stormed Hyrule Castle, and you're face to face with Aghanim, the wizard who's been manipulating everything from behind the scenes. He's firing glowing orbs of dark magic at you, and the music's pounding like a boss fight straight out of a nightmare. So naturally, you pull out your bug catching net, and somehow it works. Yeah. In A Link to the Past, you can literally defeat the game's evil sorcerer using the same tool you used to catch bees and fairies. And not only does it works perfectly. Here's what's going on. Aghanim fires 3 attack patterns during his fight. A single energy orb, the classic magic tennis shot. This is the one you can reflect back at him. A large homing blast that splits into multiple fireballs if you hit it. Don't try. A lightning strike, which you avoid by standing close to or behind him. Normally, you'd use your sword to reflect the first orb, the same energy duel that would later show up as Dead Man's Volley in future Zelda games. But A Link to the Past combat code doesn't actually check what item you're swinging. It just checks if you have an active reflecting hitbox. And guess what? The bug net has one too. So when you swing that net at the right time, it sends Aghanim's magic straight back at him, like you just parried the forces of darkness with a butterfly catcher. It's hilarious, but it's also a beautiful little quirk of how the SNES engine works. The net's wide, circular swing gives you a slightly slower rhythm than the sword, but once you get the hang of it, it's surprisingly reliable. Veteran players even recommend it because the net's spin covers a slightly bigger arc, more margin for error if your timing's off. And yes, it works in both fights. Even in Ganon's Tower, where Aghanim's copies clone his attacks, the net can still reflect the orbs as long as your positioning is right. Fans loved it so much that Nintendo canonized the joke. When Ocarina of Time came around years later, you could do the same thing against Ganondorf's energy volley, but with an empty bottle. Most players remember A Link to the Past's Zora's Waterfall. Toss in rupees, get something nice, and meet a friendly fish king, but venture into the dark world, and that same peaceful spot turns into something much stranger. Deep in the Lake of Ill Omen, there's a stone circle and a warning sign that says not to throw anything in. So naturally, you throw something in. The water churns, bubbles rise, and suddenly a giant grumpy catfish bursts from the pool, grumbling about being disturbed. Before vanishing again, it hurls the Quake Medallion at you, an item that literally shakes the earth. Most players chalked it up as just another weird Zelda moment, but that catfish, it's not random. It's a direct nod to one of Japan's oldest earthquake myths, Namazu. In Japanese folklore, Namazu is a giant catfish that lives underground, pinned beneath a sacred foundation stone called the Kanama-ishi. When it thrashes, the world shakes, literally causing earthquakes, and when people disturb its prison, bad things happen. The myth hit huge pop culture fame after the 1855 Ansei Edo earthquake, spawning tons of satirical prints known as Namazu-e, which depicted the catfish being punished for wreaking havoc. Now jump back to A Link to the Past. The Dark World catfish's Japanese name is Onamazu, meaning big catfish. It's trapped inside a stone ring, exactly like Namazu, under the Kaname-ishi, and when you disobey the sign and toss in an item, it literally causes a quake, granting you the Quake Medallion, the power of earthquakes. Even better, if you throw something in again, it spits fireballs or bombs at you, a cranky deity telling you you've tempted fate enough. We have the Master Sword, the Sword of Evil's Bane, but everyone still remembers the Red Shield. That bold crimson upgrade felt just right, stronger, cooler, and able to block fireballs like a pro. It was your badge of progress, a sign that Link wasn't just some kid with a pesky fighter's shield anymore. But here's the weird part. There's a bug in A Link to the Past that lets you change that fiery red shield to blue. Yeah, blue, a color that doesn't even belong to that tier because it's the same color palette as the fighter's shield. Here's how it happens. In the Dark World, there's this annoying little plant enemy called a picket. It's pink, harmless looking, until it steals from you. If you let it grab your red shield, and right as it's pulling it away, you cast the ether medallion to freeze it, something strange happens. You kill the frozen picket, pick your shield back up, and suddenly it's blue. But it's nothing. It's purely cosmetic. And once you leave the screen, the shield quietly resets back to red, like nothing ever happened. Under the hood, this little visual glitch comes down to how the SNES handles sprite palettes. The ether freeze interrupts the moment when the game redraws the shield's color data, and it accidentally pulls the blue palette instead of the red one. So for one brief moment, you're rocking back the fighter's shield again with the stats of the red shield, making it the blue-red shield. And it's oddly beautiful, right? Like the game winking at you, a secret reward for players who experiment with its systems just a little too much. But word of warning, if that picket actually gets away with your shield and you don't grab it back, it'll cost you 500 rupees to replace it in the Dark World shop, so glitch responsibly. You have your magic cape, your sword, and your shield, which is blue. But remember the cape? The magic cape that lets you turn invisible and go past enemies right under their noses? Like the Cloak of Invisibility from Harry Potter. I wish I had known this next one early because so much of the game would have been so much easier for me. Normally, the game expects you to earn it late. It's hidden under a tombstone in the Light World graveyard, tucked behind a fence of heavy black robes. You're supposed to lift with the Titan's Mitt. Then once you've got the power to lift those, you dash to the grave with your Pegasus boots and find a secret staircase. Your reward, the magic cape. That's how A Link to the Past wants you to do it. But Zelda players, we've never been good at following the rules. There's a clever little trick that lets you grab the magic cape way earlier. Head to the Dark World version of the graveyard. It's this eerie, overgrown stone garden east of the sanctuary. If you look closely, the same fenced area still exists, but this time it's surrounded by breakable green rocks instead of the heavy black ones. You can crack those open and step inside the sealed-off plot. Now for the fun part. Stand somewhere inside that enclosure and use the magic mirror. Instead of just popping you back to safety, it warps you to the same coordinates in the light world, which means you materialize inside the fenced graveyard you were never meant to reach yet. From there, you're free to dash to the top right tombstone, watch it slide aside, and descend into the secret chamber below. There's a single chest waiting for you to open it, and you've officially broken the sequence. The magic cape is yours. We've seen invisible walls, fake doors, and glitchy sprites, but A Link to the Past hides something even stranger. In the Swamp of Evil, the overworld outside Misery Mire, 3 invisible enemies can hit you, even though there's nothing there. Fans call them the ghosts of Misery Mire. You can't see them, you can't target them, but they're real. Walk through certain swamp tiles and you'll suddenly take damage out of nowhere. No Wizrobes, no Zoras, no visible enemies, just pain. For years, players thought it was a bug or maybe some creepy Easter egg. Then the community decided to investigate, and what they found made perfect, very Nintendo-style sense. Under the hood, these ghosts aren't supernatural at all. They're Ku, those little swamp creatures that pop up from the water, just placed in the wrong spot. In the game's code, every enemy needs to sit on a valid terrain tile. Ku are meant to spawn on shallow swamp water or ground edges, but a few in this area were accidentally placed on deep water tiles, where sprites don't draw. The logic still runs their hitboxes, behavior, and item drops, but their graphics never appear. So the result? 3 invisible, untouchable Kus that bump into you like ghosts. And you can prove they exist. Head to the Swamp of Evil from the Desert Portal. Use your flute and Titan's Mitt to reach it. Then cast the Bombo's Medallion. When the fire ring explodes, you'll see flames connect with invisible enemies, killing them in thin air. Sometimes they even drop rupees or hearts, floating in from nowhere. Other players use the hookshot or dash attacks to pinpoint their exact coordinates, and every test line up. Ooh, one fun detail. Even the Golden Bee, which normally auto-attacks enemies for you, ignores them entirely. It can't detect what it can't see. This one is a favorite of the speedrunners, as it lets you complete the game in a mere 3 minutes. We're talking about the Go Anywhere glitch, sometimes called the Walk Through Walls or the legendary 3-minute finish. Here's the gist. By exploiting a mix of ledge behavior, guard knockback, and a mid-air save, you can clip Link outside of the normal world boundaries and literally walk through the walls of Hyrule. Here's what it looks like in motion. You start by jumping off a small ledge, and right as Link's in midair, you save and quit. When you reload, the game forgets exactly where your feet are supposed to be. That small state confusion means the engine treats you like you're still falling. Then, you lure a guard towards you in a nearby room, let him push you slightly, and walk Link into a wall. Because of the broken state of the ledge save, the guard's push clips you inside the wall geometry, and once you're in, there's no stopping you. From there, you can stroll through walls, past door triggers, and across entire rooms that were never meant to load together. You're not supposed to have the Master Sword? Doesn't matter. You haven't met Aghanim? He's irrelevant. The game just happily loads whatever room exists next in memory, even if that happens to be the Triforce Chamber. That's right, you can literally walk straight into the ending cutscene. The magic of this glitch is in how the SNES handled room data. Each dungeon and castle screen in A Link to the Past exists as part of a shared world grid, and the game uses simple flags to control where Link is allowed to move. But when you confuse those flags by saving midair or by clipping through a solid wall, the game doesn't crash. It just trusts you. And suddenly, Hyrule becomes an open sandbox of half-loaded doors, wrong rooms, and void space shortcuts to the end of time. Speedrunners have refined this trick into an art form. The any % glitched category for A Link to the Past regularly clocks in at under 3 minutes, with some runs flirting with 2 minutes, 50 seconds. Here's where A Link to the Past takes an unexpected turn, not in the game itself, but in what it could have been. Because according to Shigeru Miyamoto, The Legend of Zelda was almost a sci-fi story. In a 2012 Game Cult interview, Miyamoto revealed that when they first conceived the original Zelda, the Triforce wasn't a relic of the gods. It was imagined as electronic chips. The story was meant to span both the past and the future, and the hero's name, Link, literally came from that idea. He was supposed to be the link between two eras. That early version would have mashed medieval swords and shields with future tech, almost like Zelda meets Tron. Of course, the team eventually dropped that idea, grounding the series firmly in high fantasy. But what's fascinating is that the sci-fi angle didn't completely disappear. It nearly resurfaced years later, during the development of A Link to the Past. If you've read Hyrule Historia, you might have noticed something strange tucked deep inside its art section, a piece of official concept art showing Princess Zelda in a futuristic outfit, almost like a space explorer. The caption flat out says that the design never appeared in the game, but fans immediately connected the dots. Could this have been a remnant of that old past and future idea Miyamoto once talked about? It's never been officially confirmed, but the timing and imagery line up eerily well. ALTTP's title in Japanese, Kamigami no Triforce, the Triforce of the Gods, was all about solidifying the world as mythic and timeless, not technological. So that sci-fi design probably didn't make it past early brainstorming. It makes sense why. Even by Miyamoto's own admission, fitting ALTTP onto its 8 megabit cartridge was already pushing the limits. Adding futuristic environments, tactile sets, and gadgets would have doubled the workload. Not to mention, Nintendo had just found gold with Zelda's mythic fantasy identity. They didn't want to confuse players by throwing robots and space-age relics into Hyrule before the brand was even solid. Still, imagining a version of Zelda where the Triforce are literal data chips and Link travels between ancient ruins and neon skylines is a wild alternate ending I would definitely want to observe. When Link uses the Cane of Burna in The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, it creates a shimmering blue protective aura that spins around him, rendering him invincible for as long as his magic meter lasts. During this time, the player hears a distinct looping sound effect. a rapid oscillating hum layered with a pulsing electronic tone. What's interesting is that this sound is nearly identical to the energy shield effect from the Metroid series, specifically the audio cue associated with Samus Aran's screw attack or energy barrier reactivation in the original Metroid and Metroid 2 Return of Samus. Both sounds share the same synth waveform structure, created using the SNES's SPC700 sound chip and a similar rapid frequency modulation, that buzzing aura feel, as well as using the same loop length and decay timing, hinting at direct sound sample reuse rather than mere coincidence. This crossover wasn't an accident. During the early 90s, Nintendo's in-house sound team, led by Koji Kondo and Kinji Yamamoto, often reused and remixed sound effects across titles as a kind of internal signature. Both A Link to the Past and Super Metroid shared development tools and even music engineers under Nintendo's R&D1 umbrella. Thus, the Cane of Berna's activation hum stands as a small but fascinating piece of inter-series sound design history. The live-action Japanese commercial for The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is one of the most delightfully bizarre and memorable pieces of Nintendo marketing ever made. Released in Japan in 1991, this advertisement is a full-blown musical dance number that reimagines Zelda's world as a high-energy stage performance. It features actors dressed as Link, Princess Zelda, and Ganon, all dancing in sync to a catchy J-pop style song that retells the core premise of the game, rescuing Zelda and defeating Ganon through upbeat choreography and flashy lighting. The commercial opens dramatically with Link striking a heroic pose before the scene explodes into dance. Zelda joins in, twirling gracefully, while Ganon and his minions perform exaggerated villain moves. The background continuously flashes between bright neon colors and fantasy backdrops resembling Hyrule's castle and dungeons. The choreography is surprisingly intricate, blending pop idol aesthetics with Japanese stage theater flair. Throughout the commercial, the music punctuates the action with synthesized drum beats and lyrics roughly translating to "Zelda, the legend continues," reinforcing the excitement around the SNES's upgraded visuals and sound capabilities. At the time, Japan's gaming ads were known for being more theatrical and humorous than their Western counterparts, often mixing pop culture trends with fantasy elements. This particular Zelda ad fits that mold perfectly. It was designed to appeal to a broad audience, especially children, by making Link look like a modern action idol rather than just a video game sprite. Despite its campy tone, the commercial effectively communicated the game's sense of adventure and magic. A Link to the Past has to be one of the best things that happened to the Zelda series. This was the game that defined what Zelda was supposed to feel like. It sold over 4.78 million copies, earned perfect review scores across Japan and the West, and immediately became the measuring stick for adventure games. Magazines called it a masterpiece of design, a work of art, and Nintendo at its absolute peak. So how do you follow up a masterpiece? Well, by accident, apparently. Link's Awakening started as what was basically an after-hours hobby project. According to Iwata Asks, Kazuaki Morita was just messing around one night with the only Game Boy dev kit the team had, trying to see if he could make something like Zelda on a handheld. No budget, no plan, no permission. And Kazuaki Morita was a part of SRD, which wasn't even a Nintendo division. They were a partner studio that had been quietly co-developing games with Nintendo since the NES days, doing the behind-the-scenes coding for Super Mario Bros., Donkey Kong, and A Link to the Past. They lived inside Nintendo's offices, but technically they were independent. So the fact that one of their programmers used leftover hardware to prototype a new Zelda, it really was a garage project inside Nintendo. Takashi Tezuka, one of Zelda's lead creators, remembers it perfectly. At first, there was no official project. We worked on it like an after-school club. That's literally how Link's Awakening began. A bunch of devs sneaking in extra work because it was fun. And once the prototype started looking promising, Tezuka stepped in to direct it properly and convinced Nintendo to make it official. Shigeru Miyamoto was aware of it, but he wasn't heavily involved this time. He mostly checked in in occasionally. This one was really Tezuka's and Marita's baby. As the team grew, more familiar names joined the club. Kensuke Tanabe, who helped script A Link to the Past, returned to write dialogue and structure the story. And a young Yoshiaki Koizumi, who'd later go on to direct Super Mario Galaxy and Majora's Mask, wrote the cinematic opening and infused the game with that dreamlike melancholy that defines Link's Awakening. Because this wasn't a big, buttoned-up SNES production, it was a handful of developers experimenting with limited hardware and a lot of freedom. That's why the game's tone is so playful, so dreamlike, and so weird. Being a wild after-school project during the development, Link's Awakening had its inspiration coming from the wildest places. Director Takashi Tezuka straight up said he wanted Link's Awakening to feel somewhat like Twin Peaks, a small number of characters in a small town, and he told the team to make the villagers suspicious types. That's a real quote from Iwata Asks. Think about that for a second. A Zelda game inspired by Twin Peaks. Koholint Island suddenly clicks. It's a cozy, looping little town full of characters who all seem just slightly off. You've got the chatty shopkeeper, the lazy fisherman, the singing girl, Terran turning into a raccoon, and an entire animal village that's somehow both charming and unnerving. It's a small town life, except every smile hides something strange. That everyone's a bit suspicious rule gave Koholint its soul. The island feels intimate, like you could learn everyone's routine, but the more you get to know them, the more that quiet dread seeps in. The mood is gentle on the surface, but you feel that something isn't right. It's dream logic, warm and sad at the same time. Even the owl fits that vibe perfectly. He appears, vanishes, gives half-truths, and speaks in riddles about what's real and what isn't. Tezuka and Iwata later joked that development was so loose that people just kept adding things they thought were funny. Yoshiaki Koizumi, then early in his career, took that Twin Peaks idea and wrote it into the story. He shaped the game's opening, its dreamlike narrative, and that emotional gut-punch ending. Producer Eiji Oanuma would later say this was the first Zelda with a proper plot, and he's right. It's not just save the princess, it's wake up and lose everything. It's also wild trivia, but worth mentioning. Twin Peaks co-creator Mark Frost once said he met with Nintendo in 1990 to talk about a Twin Peaks video game. There's no hard proof that directly influenced Link's Awakening, but the timing and the shared creative energy. And if you thought the Twin Peaks influence was wild, wait till you hear this part. Tezuka straight up laughed about how freely the team was dropping non-Zelda characters into the game. He says they added characters that looked like Mario and Luigi and Kirby. And when Iwata and Aonuma press him, "Did you even get permission from Hal for Kirby?" Tezuka just smiles and says he doesn't remember. That's how loose Link's Awakening really was. The Iwata Asks section is literally titled Kirby and Chomps in Zelda, because Koholint Island is a dream, the Wind Fish's dream. The devs could justify almost anything. Weird mashups, strange crossovers, even Mario enemies showing up in Zelda dungeons suddenly made sense. Dream logic meant no rules. Plus, all of these characters were Nintendo's own. This wasn't breaking copyright. It was basically Nintendo having fun inside its own toy box. You can almost imagine the team saying, well, they're our characters, let's just use them. And they went all in. You literally walk a chain chomp named Bow Wow like a pet. He barks, eats shrubs, scares off monsters, and it's adorable. It's the kind of bizarre crossover only this game could pull off, and even Iwata called it out by name. In the dungeons, you'll find Goombas, piranha plants, Shy Guys, Thwomps, and Cheep Cheeps, especially in those little side-scrolling rooms that suddenly turn Zelda into a mini Mario platformer. Those segments weren't just for show. They were a clever technical reuse. The Game Boy's Zelda engine could handle short 2D sequences, so the team used those to drop in Mario-style behavior Goombas that waddle, and Thwomps that slam down without writing a ton of new code. And then there's Kirby. Well, technically anti-Kirby. He shows up in Eagle's Tower floor, trying to inhale Link off the screen. You can defeat him by feeding him bombs, the ultimate role reversal for the pink puffball, who's usually the one doing the eating. Tezuka actually mentions this fight in Iwata Asks, like it was just one more mischievous idea that slipped in. There's even a Yoshi doll, the first prize you can win at the trendy game, which kicks off the entire trading quest. That's pure Mario World DNA right there, woven straight into Zelda's quest design. And if you explore far enough, you'll meet Mr. Wright, a lonely writer modeled on SimCity's Dr. Wright, who was, in turn, based on real-world designer Will Wright. He even shows you a letter from his pen pal that's secretly a picture of Princess Peach. The after-school discussion kids had with this, and the countless moments where you recognize a different character in this game, felt wild. And here's what still blows my mind. They pulled all of that off on a Game Boy, a 4-shade 160 by 144 pixel handheld that could barely hold a tune compared to the SNES, and somehow this little gray brick managed to feel like a full-blown A Link to the Past. The dungeons are real dungeons, sprawling multi-room mazes with that same rhythm every Zelda fan knows by heart. Find the map, then the compass. Collect your small keys, uncover the dungeon's special item, grab the nightmare key, and finally take down the boss for your prize. That loop, that sense of escalating tension and reward, is identical to what A Link to the Past did on a system a dozen times stronger. Even the item gating makes a return. Cracked walls for bombs, gaps for the hookshot, stones you can lift once you find the power bracelet, and tiles just begging for a Pegasus boot dash. It's A Link to the Past design grammar squeezed perfectly into a pocket-sized screen. And the best part? They didn't just copy, they added something new. Rock's Feather. That one item changed everything. For the first time in a mainline Zelda, you could jump. That tiny change opened up a whole new language for puzzles, platforming sections, side-scrolling corridors, moments that felt half Mario, half Zelda. It gave the game a verticality and lightness you'd never expect on Game Boy. Because the hardware was so simple, just 2 main face buttons, the team came up with one of the smartest control solutions ever. You could assign any 2 items to A and B. Want to jump and swing your sword? Do it. Need bombs and the Pegasus boots? Go ahead. It sounds basic now, but in 1993 that flexibility was revolutionary. It made Link feel agile and adaptable, and it made the whole adventure yours. When Link's Awakening DX dropped on the Game Boy Color in 1998, it wasn't just a visual upgrade. It came with something brand new, tucked quietly inside the world, the Color Dungeon. To even find it, you had to dig a little. In the library, there's this one high-up red book that just won't budge. Dash into the shelf with your Pegasus boots, and it finally drops, revealing a coded message, the exact grave-pushing order that opens a secret entrance in the cemetery. That's your ticket in. Inside, the Color Dungeon leans into what the Game Boy Color could finally do. Full-on color puzzles. You push colored blocks, match hues, and navigate rooms designed around light and contrast. It's clever, short, and very self-aware about being a color showcase, but it also fits Link's Awakening's quirky, experimental heart perfectly. And at the end, after you beat the boss, a weirdly satisfying fight against hard-hit Beetle, a great fairy appears and offers you something that, at the time, felt like a huge decision. She gives you a choice: red tunic for doubled attack power, or blue tunic for halved incoming damage. No takebacks to green either. Once you've chosen, that's your Link for the rest of the adventure. Well, mostly. In the DX version, you can go back and swap between red and blue later by revisiting the fairy, but you can't return to the original green tunic. And in the 2019 Switch remake, you can switch freely between all 3, no extra fights needed. Each choice comes with its own kind of power fantasy. If you're going for speed or low heart runs, red is the obvious pick. Pair it with the level 2 seashell sword, and you'll tear through enemies like paper. But most players back then went with blue, because that defense boost smoothed out the harder dungeons and bosses, without changing the balance too much. The best part is that this was the first time Zelda really gave players a persistent build choice. It wasn't just a temporary buff like a Guardian Acorn or a piece of power. This was a real, mechanical identity that you could carry through the entire game. It's a small thing by today's standards, but in 1998, it was basically a prototype for what what we'd later see with armor sets and upgrade paths in modern Zelda games. Even the dungeon itself is packed with little touches. The music nods back to the original Legend of Zelda's dungeon theme, and it's the only place in the entire game where you can collect green rupees. It's like a miniature celebration of Zelda's past, hiding inside a game that was already one giant dream. Link's Awakening DX didn't just bring color, it added new life. I cannot imagine a Zelda game without fishing, and let me tell you, this has to be the first Zelda game to introduce it, because if you've ever lost an embarrassing amount of time trying to reel in that giant Hylian loach in Ocarina of Time, you've got one man to thank, Kazuaki Morita from SRD. In Iwata Asks, both Satoru Iwata and Takashi Tezuka flat out say it. Morita was the one who started Zelda's obsession with fishing. He built the first fishing pond in Link's Awakening, completely on his own, during that same after-hours development phase when the whole team was treating the project like an after-school club. Eiji Aonuma even laughs about it, saying, "The one Morita-san made for Link's Awakening started all that," and Toshihiko Nakago from SRD jokes that Morita's the kind of guy who just makes fishing games without even being asked. It's such a perfect snapshot of that era, developers following their instincts, building things just because they seemed fun, and somehow creating mechanics that would echo across the series for decades. When Ocarina of Time rolled around, Morita did it again. He was working on the Water Temple, the most complex dungeon in the game, and while tinkering with Lake Hylia's environment, he casually dropped in a prototype fishing system. Iwata teased him about it later, saying it had nothing to do with Link's adventure, but it was just too good to cut. So they didn't. They built a dedicated fishing pond right into Ocarina of Time, and the rest is history. But it all started here in Link's Awakening, with one small pond, a simple bite and reel loop, and a programmer who couldn't stop adding his favorite pastime into Zelda. And then there's the part of Link's Awakening that still gets people whispering on fan forums and localization blogs, the racy stuff. See, back in the early 1990s, Nintendo of America had a very strict content policy. No religious symbols, no blood, definitely no nudity or suggestive humor, and Link's Awakening, with all its quirky tongue-in-cheek energy, ended up running right into those rules. In Japan and parts of Europe, the original Game Boy version had a few cheeky little moments. Nothing scandalous, just a wink and a grin. But when it came time for the US release, those scenes got cleaned up fast. Take the hippo model in Animal Village. In the Japanese and early French or German versions, she's literally posing for an art class, a life model with a towel around her waist, and she quickly covers up when Link walks in. It's played for light comedy, not shock value. But in the US version, the towel stays up, her body is redrawn, and the entire gag is softened into something you could safely show your parents. When the Game Boy Color DX version arrived, it mostly followed the US edits, keeping that tamer look across Western releases. Only the Japanese DX version kept the original pose. By the time we got to the 2019 Switch remake, Nintendo just went with one worldwide model, the hippo fully clothed, hourglass-shaped, and still endearingly flustered, just not risque anymore. Then there's the mermaid quest in Martha's Bay. In the Japanese release, her lost item is her bikini top, which explains why she gets embarrassed when Link dives near her. But in the US version, that became a necklace, and all the dialogue was rewritten to match. The same change carried through every later version, all the way to the remake. Even the Kookmin, those talking blobs you meet after sprinkling magic powder, got localization tweaks. In some European versions, especially the German version, they toss out surprisingly edgy jokes like always use a condom, possibly a jab at the Kookman's design that were later softened in the DX re-release. Legends of Localization actually uses Link's Awakening as a case study in how regional tone shifting worked back then, where every line was combed for safe edits. And what's fascinating is how uneven that process was across Europe. Early French and German Game Boy cartridges often shipped with the original Japanese content, the hippo, the mermaid top, all intact. But once DX arrived, those regions standardized to the US-style edits. Today, that division's gone. The Switch remake smoothed everything out into one consistent global version. No bikinis, no topless hippos, just charm and nostalgia intact. Still, those early differences are a time capsule, a reminder of how Link's Awakening's playful, mischievous tone sometimes butted heads with Nintendo's corporate caution. Link's Awakening also gave many kids moral lessons. In the game, there was something that eventually every kid tried: stealing. I know you did that. Every Zelda player remembers that moment of curiosity. You pick up the bow, maybe the shovel, and start to wonder, what if I just run for it? You grab the item you want, start running tight little circles around the shopkeeper, and watch as his gaze follows you. The trick is to make him face away from the exit. The second his head turns, you bolt for the door with the item still in hand. It's the classic orbit and dash method, part mischief, part mastery. And yes, it works. You get the item free, but the game never lets you off the hook. From that moment on, your save file is branded with a single, brutal word: thief. Every single NPC, Marin, the Great Fairies, even the Windfish himself calls you that for the rest of the game. There's no way to undo it, no secret forgiveness quest, nothing. You've marked your own legend forever. And when you go back into the shop, the shopkeeper just stands there, waiting. The music stops. He smiles at you, says, "You must pay the ultimate price," and one-shots you with a lightning bolt, which, in my opinion, is a slight nod at how the shopkeeper has unlimited power. Instant death, automatic, game over. After that, you can shop again as normal, but the shame remains. You're still thief. The Game Boy version did it, the DX version kept it, and the 2019 Switch remake recreated it beautifully. Sharper animation, same cosmic punishment. The lightning bolt that strikes you, kills you, and the death still counts, which would affect the true ending of the game. Yes, there was a true ending. Most players saw the credits roll and thought that was it. The Windfish wakes, the island fades, Link drifts at sea. But if you beat the game without dying even once, the story gives you one last, gentle miracle. After the credits, there's an extra scene. On the original Game Boy, Marin's sprite appears with wings, angelic, glowing, and then a single seagull flies across the sky. In the DX version, her portrait slowly dissolves into that seagull, which soars upward into the sunlight. And in the Switch remake, that moment returns in full color, the camera panning up as the bird glides free. Marin's wish fulfilled at last. It's one of those endings that only hits harder once you understand what it means. Throughout the game, Marin talks about wanting to leave Koholint Island to see the world beyond the sea. But since the island itself is a dream, that's impossible, unless you never die. That no death run, no game over screens, no shopkeeper's app, no bad saves is the only way to give her that freedom. The rule is simple: finish the game with 0 deaths on your save file. The moment you see a game over screen, the counter increments and the sequel ending is gone. Crazy Tracy's secret medicine can save you. It auto-revives Link and doesn't count as a death, both in the Game Boy versions and the Switch remake. But here's the catch: fairies don't. In the remake, bottled fairies just heal you when you use them manually. So if you fall in battle expecting a fairy to revive you, that's it. One game over, and the dream dies with it. And yes, if you ever stole from the shopkeeper, that also counts. His lightning strike is an instant kill, and it adds a death to your file. So if you plan on chasing the true ending, keep your hands to yourself. Most veterans will tell you to save often, maybe even back up your file before tough bosses like Facade or Deathel, because of one mistake, one unlucky hit, and Marin's wings vanish. But when you do pull it off, when you finally wake the Windfish and see that lone seagull flying over the endless ocean, it's one of the purest rewards the series has ever given. The fun hijinks and the chaos of Link's Awakening don't stop there. Remember the Cuckoos? In this game, you can actually put an end to them. First, find yourself a Cuckoo. The easiest place is right in Maybe Village, where they strut around near the tool shop and the nearby houses, innocent little targets just begging for trouble. Next, you'll need either the magic powder or the fire rod. The magic powder is available early on. You can get it from the witch's hut after bringing her the sleepy toadstool from the mysterious forest. The fire rod, also called the magic rod, comes much later in the game, inside Turtle Rock, and it's far more powerful. Now, normally, if you start whacking a Cuckoo with your sword, you'll trigger the famous Cuckoo Revenge Squad, the Zelda series' most chaotic running gag. A few hits in, and an angry flock will swarm the screen, pecking Link into oblivion. But in Link's Awakening, you can take it a step further. Stand stand near a cuckoo and sprinkle it with magic powder, or hit it directly with a burst from the fire rod. Instead of calling for backup, the poor bird will burst into flames, turn to ash, and vanish completely. No respawn, no endless swarm, just silence and a little puff of smoke. If you leave and re-enter the area, new cuckoos will appear, but that one? Gone. You actually killed it. That's what makes this such a strange little corner of Zelda history. This is the only game in the entire series where cuckoos can be permanently destroyed. Every other Zelda treats them like divine beings being immune to death, vengeful, and oddly sacred. But on Koholint Island, for once, the player gets the upper hand. Of course, the 2019 Switch remake quietly took that away. The fire rod still shoots fire, but Cuckoos just shrugs it off. You can still make them angry and summon the Revenge Squad, but you'll never burn one to ashes again. Adding to the chaos of Link's Awakening, the Doghouse War. It starts in the most innocent place imaginable, Madame Meow Meow's house in Maybe Village, the one with her adorable chain chomp looking pet, Bow Wow. Nothing about it screams doorway to another dimension, and yet it is. If you touch Bow Wow's doghouse door from the wrong side, the game doesn't know what to do with you. Instead of sending Link into the normal house, it warps him into a corrupted underworld, a glitched dungeon stitched together from scrambled map data. The exact nightmare you fall into depends on something so weirdly specific, it almost sounds made up. Your enemy kill count. That same counter the game uses to decide when to drop a piece of power also quietly decides which glitched dungeon you'll land in. Kill a few Octoroks before you warp, and you might end up in one glitched world. Kill a few more, and suddenly you're in another. Like turning a radio made out of broken dreams. To try it yourself, and yes, people still do, here's how the speedrunning community does it. You start by killing a chosen number of enemies, let's say 4, since that's a popular setup among runners. Then head to Madame Meow Meow's house in Maybe Village. Stand at the top right corner of the doghouse, facing down. Gently clip into the wall so that Link's sprite overlaps the right edge by just a few pixels. Then hold down left. If you've done it right, Link will touch the doghouse's warp trigger from above, and boom, you're gone. The screen fades, the music warps, and you reappear in a bizarre tile-scrambled world. Stairs lead to nowhere. Chests contain items they were never meant to. Sprites from different dungeons overlap in ways that make no sense. Sometimes you can even find a path straight to the end game, skipping most of the adventure, which is why speedrunners still practice this, using it for any % routes that finish the game in minutes. But it's not all fun and treasure. The doghouse warp is dangerous. These underworlds weren't meant to exist, and the wrong room can soft lock or crash your game completely. Entering mini-boss rooms often loops the portal sound endlessly, forcing a reset. And saving while inside one of these glitch worlds can trap your file forever. Trust me, I learned that the hard way. So if you ever want to experiment, back up your save. Seriously, one wrong step and you're as lost as the pixels around you. And yes, it still works in Link's Awakening DX on Game Boy Color. Same exploit, same kill count logic, same strange feeling that you've just opened a door into something you weren't supposed to see. Under the hood, it's all because that doghouse warp is only programmed to work from below. When you clip into it from the top or side, the game calls the wrong index in memory, cross-referencing it with your current kill counter. The result? A completely mismatched data table collision. Sprites, music, everything, all scrambled but repeatable. This part has to be the sweetest part of the game. All the goofy adventures with Marin. One of the most magical moments in Link's Awakening isn't in a dungeon or a boss fight. It's when Marin starts following you. After you rescue her from Animal Village and recruit her to help wake the walrus, Marin tags along behind you on the overworld. She doesn't follow you everywhere. She'll politely refuse to enter dungeons or certain interiors like the Dream Shrine, telling you she'll wait outside. But when you come back out, she's right there, ready with a comment or a tease, like a traveling companion who actually notices what you're doing. And that's what makes this part so special. She reacts to everything. Try digging, and she cheers you on with hilarious enthusiasm. Great, dig it, dig to the center of the earth. Start playing your ocarina, and she cuts you down immediately. Not very good. Then awkwardly walks it back with, "No, you're hearing things." Even her reactions to your mischief are amazing. Smash a pot? You're a bad boy, Link. Peek inside someone's dresser? Link, do you always look in other people's drawers? It's like the game suddenly gains a built-in commentary track, and Marin is the perfect mix of sweet and savage. But my favorite moment? When you start hitting a cuckoo in front of her. At first, she scolds you. No, poor hen, stop that. But if you keep doing it, she cracks and cheers you on. Do it more. Then she catches herself. Huh? No, I didn't mean it. It's such an unhinged little exchange that feels human in a way games from 1993 rarely did. There's also this quiet, almost romantic scene at the far left seaside cliff. If you bring Marin there, she stops and calls it our secret place. The music fades, she blushes, and for a second, you forget you're even playing a Game Boy game. It's tender, bittersweet, and fleeting, just like everything about her. And because this was the DX era, some of these moments were immortalized in a brand new feature, The Travels of Link. Exclusive to the Link's Awakening DX release on Game Boy Color, this side quest pairs Link with his very own photographer, officially called the Camera Mouse. Throughout your journey, this cheerful little mouse pops up in key spots to snap pictures of Link's adventures, creating a 12-photo album you can view anytime. Some photos are automatic story moments, while others are hidden little gags you can trigger through exploration or mischief. Several of Marin's best moments are captured this way. The heads-up scene, where she jumps into the well after you and lands on your head. The seaside secret place, a soft emotional moment frozen forever. And even a silly shot of Terran getting himself stuck in the weathercock. And get this, back in 1998, you could actually print these photos with the Game Boy printer. Literal Polaroid-style memories of your pixelated adventures. It's wild to think about now. Then there's the trendy game scene, another highlight. Bring Marin into the shop, and she begs to try the crane game. If you let her, she uses it to grab the shop owner himself and drop him on the conveyor belt. He praises her skill for a second, then kicks you both out for being pros. It's pure Link's Awakening energy, chaotic, self-aware, and full of heart. Even the village kids join in, teasing you about your date whenever Marin's following you. It all builds this cozy small-town rhythm, part sitcom, part dream, part love story. When I first played it, I didn't realize how rare that was. Marin wasn't just a quest companion, she lived beside you, laughed with you, called you out, and made the world feel personal. And because you know how her story ends, every small moment with her, every cheer, every laugh hits that much harder. Even now when I replay Link's Awakening, I always take my time. I'll dig a few extra holes just to hear her laugh. I'll smash a pot just to see her scold me. After you finish the Ghost side quest, you know the one. The spirit that starts following Link after Angler's Tunnel, you carry it back to its old home, the crumbling house by the bay. It floats there for a bit, remembering the past, then asks you to take it to its grave, just west of the main cemetery near the path to the witch's hut. You lay it to rest, the haunting music fades, and you move on. But if you're the curious type, the kind who pokes every corner of Koholint, you might come back later and experiment. Because if you stand in front of that same grave and sprinkle magic powder on it, the headstone suddenly speaks. Don't sprinkle that on me. I'll have to curse you. Of course, the curse is just a bluff. Nothing happens. No damage, no debuff, no shadowy apparition, just a ghost giving you attitude from beyond the grave. It's a prank. A bit of ghostly flavor text from a team that clearly loved hiding weird reactions in plain sight. And if you're playing the DX version, you get a little bonus for paying your respects. Touch the grave after finishing the quest, and the camera mouse shows up to snap a picture titled, I Was Very Afraid. It's another entry in the Travels of Link photo album, a bittersweet keepsake from one of the game's most quietly emotional stories. Another little detail that perfectly captures its offbeat, handmade charm is the phone booths. Scattered all across Koholint are these tiny wooden huts with a rotary phone inside. Step inside, lift the receiver, and you're instantly connected to Old Man Ulrira, your island hotline for hints and gentle nudges in the right direction. They're basically Link's Awakening's version of a hint system, long before quest markers or tutorials existed. The idea was simple, but brilliant. You're stranded on a mysterious island, so instead of a fairy companion or a talking sword, your guide is this shy old man giving you tips over the phone. And that's the best part, Ulrira's quirk. If you go visit him in person at his house in Maybe Village, he gets nervous and says he's too shy to talk face to face. He literally tells you to call him from a booth instead. So you step outside, pick up the phone, and suddenly he's totally confident, chatty, friendly, full of advice. It's such a charming little human detail that somehow makes the whole world feel more alive. There are about 8 phone booths scattered around the island, in both the Game Boy and Switch versions, each giving you context-sensitive hints depending on where you are in the story. You can practically feel the developers smiling through the script. Every call sounds like it's from someone who wants you to succeed, not just a tutorial pop-up. But the real gem comes from when you pick up the phone inside Ulrira's own house. Instead of Ulrira's voice, you hear, "Yes, it's the Bucket Mouse. Thanks for calling." And every player's first reaction is the same. Who the heck is Bucket Mouse? Well, here's the fun part. It's not actually Bucket Mouse. It's a mistranslation. The Japanese text refers to Bucket Mouth, which isn't a person or creature at all. It's the name of a real fishing tackle shop in Niyagawa, just northeast of Osaka. Developers and translators later confirmed the reference. Bucket Mouth was a local store known among Nintendo staff, especially Kazuaki Morita from SRD, the same programmer who snuck Zelda's first fishing minigame into Link's Awakening. In fact, Morita loved that shop so much that when he worked on Ocarina of Time, he modeled the fishing pond owner after the actual Bucket Mouth proprietor, a little inside joke that quietly connects the Game Boy's pond to Hyrule's Lake Hylia years later. If you play Link's Awakening on the Nintendo Switch in any language other than English, the same mysterious phone call inside Ulrira's house changes completely. Instead of hearing from Bucket Mouse, the voice on the line now says it's calling from the Nintendo Gallery, and even asks if you have any photographs to show. It's a cute meta-reference to the Nintendo Gallery from The Wind Waker, the museum where you could collect and display figurines of characters from across the game. Considering that the original Link's Awakening DX on Game Boy Color had its own photo side quest, The Travels of Link, tied to the Game Boy printer, this updated line is both a callback and a modernization of that old photography theme. Even stranger, in the French-Canadian localization, the Bucket Mouse line was replaced entirely with a call from Madonna. Yup, just Madonna, because why not? Here's one of those delightful little secrets that feels so on brand for Link's Awakening. The kind of Easter egg that's small, musical, and full of heart. If you start a new file and name it Zelda in all caps, something magical happens. When you land on the file select screen, instead of the regular overworld tune, the game bursts into a lively samba remix of the classic Legend of Zelda theme. It's upbeat, tropical, and somehow fits Link's Awakening's sunny island tone perfectly. And it's not a rumor or emulator myth. It really works, both in the original Game Boy and DX versions, and even in the 2019 Switch remake. It's one of those nods that feels like a gift to longtime fans. A little wink for anyone who grew up typing Zelda into their cartridges just to see what would happen. There are even regional versions of this trick. In the German release, naming your file Mois triggers a similar musical flourish, a tribute to Claude M. Mois, the translator who handled the German localization. The French version has its own unique naming Easter egg too, giving each region its own flavor of developer mischief. And while the Zelda Samba is the headliner, there's another musical secret tucked inside Link's Awakening's code, Totaka's Song. Composer Kazumi Totaka, who later became known for Animal Crossing's KK Slider, whose Japanese name is literally Totakeke, hid his signature 19-note jingle in many Nintendo games. In some Japanese versions of Link's Awakening, you can make it play by naming your file Totakeke. The Switch remake even made this Easter egg worldwide, so now everyone can find it, though Zelda still unlocks the Samba remix instead. If you're here right now, that means Hyrule really lives in you. So listen, you can't stop here. There's a part 2 waiting, and it goes even deeper into the secrets and stories we didn't touch yet. It's already ready for you. Go watch it next. You'll love it.